Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dynamics Corner, the podcast where we dive deep into all things Microsoft Dynamics. Whether you're a seasoned expert or just starting your journey into the world of Dynamics 365, this is your place to gain insights, learn new tricks, and hear from industry experts. I'm your co-host, Kris.
And this is Brad. This episode was recorded on August 23rd, 2023. Kris. Here we are back at it again. And I noticed I always lean forward when I say this is Brad. Why? Why do I do that?
Just in case they need to hear you.
I don't understand. But maybe I can train myself to just sit up, shoulders back.
Shoulders back.
We do this. Yes. Well, another great episode. As always, all episodes are great. In this episode, we had the pleasure of continuing our discussion about accessibility, equity, inclusivity, diversity within the workplace. With us today, we had the opportunity to bring back Taylor Dorward. Were you guys talking without me? That's against the rules.
Maybe.
No, we were just talking about baseball, you know. Talk about
that's
baseball.
Right. Taylor's a baseball fan. He likes the Yankees, I heard.
Oh, God. Feel bad for any New York fans.
No.
Mets or Yankees.
No. Taylor, Kris, thank you for joining us this morning or today, whatever it is. We already started with the technical difficulties. I appreciate you both bearing with me at the times of technical troubles.
It started to rust because we've been so busy. We haven't done any podcasts for.
I think that's what it is. It's actually your fault. I'm blaming you because you told me to hook up the iPhone to the computer and use that as a camera. And ever since then, I've been having issues. But now I realized that this issue was a human issue because something you told me to do, I didn't do. So we've moved on. We've survived. And here we are again today. Taylor, thank you for joining us again. I've been looking forward to following up on the conversation that we had a few months ago on accessibility, inclusivity, and diversity within the community and the, everywhere, I guess you could say. It's not just within this community. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us again.
Yeah, absolutely.
What have you been up to this summer?
Thank you guys for having me again.
No, it's our pleasure. And we're looking forward to seeing you in Summit as well. As we talked about last time, we're coming up on just, I think, a little under 2 months away, which will be great.
Yeah,
It's coming up fast.
Excited for that.
Yeah, I think it would be good. So how's your summer been since we last spoke?
Been pretty good. Spending some time on the lake with family and friends. Just kind of relaxing, trying to expand my knowledge on accessibility and Power Apps. Nothing too new, just kind of grinding away, enjoying my free time watching baseball as always.
As I think I said it last time, I can honestly say that I have not seen one pitch other than the minor league team that I go to local, just more for the experience. I have not watched one pitch of baseball this year. Usually I would even see it in passing when I'm out to eat or out somewhere. And this year I can honestly...
If you were to watch baseball, Brad, what MLB team would you be watching? The Yankees?
No. I would watch the Red Sox, of course.
The Red Sox, you go.
Baseball with me, it just turned to just be too much. It's too long, too boring.
You don't want to take a nap in the stands?
I mean, maybe it's good to fall asleep to. I used to listen to it on headphones when I was mowing the lawn or something. But
I think the difference is that being there is different experience just as watching it on TV. Big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. The game seems to fly by when you're there because there's nonstop things going on. You're not sitting through a commercial and This year they added the new rules. I don't know if either of you've heard or seen about it, but it's cut the game time down quite a bit. So it's trying to get more action for the fans.
Any sport, I think, if you do in person or do live, is a different experience.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I think that you can get the atmosphere. You just have the people, you have the smells, you have all of your senses can be stimulated while you're at a game and watching a game. On TV, it's a much different experience. But also with baseball, with them having 182 games. If you have tickets, that's a lot of games you'd have to go to if you had season tickets. So yeah, I used to go here and there just for the experience, but I stopped years ago. But speaking of that, and you also said that you have been working with gaining some knowledge with power apps and accessibility. Can you share with us some of your things that you've talked about, or some of the things that you learned to come across with accessibility?
Since I spoke with you guys last, I've definitely spent a lot more of my time focused on power apps, and I've kind of tried to do my best in blending those two passions of mine, creating accessible power apps, kind of blending my two passions in this field. And I've had some fun with that. Definitely takes some practice getting used to kind of having these things in the front of your mind when you're creating a UI, rather than coming in at the end and making all those changes. So I'm just trying to get in the habit of doing that stuff on the front end, which I think more and more people should start doing, because it's definitely a lot easier to do it on the front end rather than try and go back and change things up and cause problems, especially if you have to change UX stuff as well to accommodate for people. So I've definitely been spending a lot of time with accessibility within Power Apps.
That's great. And it's sort of a continuation. I know we also wanted to dive into, last time we talked about applications with some things for accessibility, and you've experienced that with Power Apps over the summer. We talked about some changes or suggestions that, some things some events such as conferences could also take into consideration to enhance accessibility. What things have... What?
Sorry, Taylor. I know you're focusing on Power Apps. Are you going to the Power Platform Conference in October in Vegas?
No, unfortunately, no. I submitted a few sessions, but I don't know if it was a user error. It very possibly could have been, but I never heard anything back. So I don't think I'll be going this year, which is unfortunate because that seems like it'd be fun. But who knows? Maybe next year.
Next year? Yeah. I think I want to try to go next year as well, because I think this is new for the Power Platform Conference, and they've done it a couple of years now, but that's in October 3rd through the 5th in Las Vegas MGM. So that's another conference that I'd love to get to.
Yeah, it would definitely be a little substantial trying to go back-to-back conferences like that. Could be a little stressful.
Yeah.
Definitely. And even if you have, you could share presentations or such. So we left last time talking about some of those items, and I'm interested in hearing about what you are doing with Power Apps with accessibility. But we also wanted to move a little bit more into accessibility. I think accessibility in the workplace and some other accessibility options that are, or things that, I hate to use the word things, but other accessibility adjustments that can be easily made, or that others can make in their everyday life to help others.
Yeah, for sure. And when you think accessibility in the workplace, at least for me, I think of it in two different ways. Like one in a physical office and making things accessible for people. But when I address accessibility in the workplace, like I will be doing at Summit, I approach it from what I think the workplace being like this, being virtual and remote. So there's definitely two different angles you can go at it, but I definitely will be focusing more on remote workers and trying to make it easier on disabled persons who are working remotely.
Okay, and you had mentioned you're going to give a presentation about accessibility in the workplace at Summit this October as well.
Yes, I'm definitely very excited about it. It'll be the I believe, the third time now I'll be doing this session, which I'm pretty excited about. Even people who have already seen this session before in person, I am constantly trying to revise and add new things and maybe take some things out here and there. So even if you've seen it before, I try to make it a new experience every time.
That's awesome. Perfect, because we can talk about some of it now. I'm interested. Maybe it's a preview to your session that you're going to have in October that everyone should attend and also speak with you about, because it's I like the energy you have with what you present and how you explain it, and I think anybody talking and seeing it will get something from it. But what are some things that you have found or you see when you mentioned accessibility in the workplace from the remote aspect that a company or organization can do to make it more accessible?
I would say definitely the biggest thing I always encourage people to do is just creating an open line of communication, because I feel like that can, just getting that conversation started can help make that process so much easier for both managers and employees and companies overall. Because it can definitely be an intimidating topic to some, and some managers may not want to ask their employees if they need something, and some employees may not want to ask their managers to help them with something. So definitely, I would say the most important thing is just creating that open line of communication and kind of making it less of an uncomfortable topic in the workplace and making it a little bit more normalized.
Okay, so one of the things that you suggest is to make, or have, as you had stated, an open line of communication to make it less difficult to talk about accessibility, either from the employer manager perspective or the employee that may need some additional support for some disability that they may have. How can someone do that? So we can say that let's have an open line of communication, which sounds great. Yeah. But what are some things that can be done to make it a less uncomfortable conversation, request, or ask, even like you said, which is great, because it's not only the individual that has the disability that may feel uncomfortable about asking, it's somebody asking if somebody needs additional assistance without maybe making them feel out of place or making them feel poorly or feel different. So what are some things that can be done to open those communication channels?
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, it's definitely much easier said than done. And one thing I touch on is I kind of think it should be put a little bit more in the manager's responsibility, and because it can definitely be challenging for someone to be forthcoming about their disability to their coworkers and to their managers. So I always encourage managers to let all of their employees know if they have any of these issues, that they can come to them one-on-one, instead of having to raise their hand in meetings, say, hey, I can't read this, or I need a little bit more time because I struggle with this. So having that separate line of communication as well can definitely help, because I know for me, when I first became disabled, I wasn't running around telling everyone. I kind of took advantage of the fact that some people couldn't really tell by looking at me. I would hide it a little bit, and at this point in my life, I realized that was foolish of me. But yeah, I would definitely say it's a little bit more in the managers, in their responsibility. It definitely goes both ways, but I believe with the managers, just creating that culture in the workplace that you can come to me if you need this, and just letting their employees know that that's an option, that will definitely help make their employees more willing to come to them.
I think that is a good point. I think adding that layer of comfort that an employer is understanding that some individuals may have accessibility issues or disabilities that are hidden, and knowing that it's okay and that they understand that that may be the case and that they're willing to speak with somebody about it to, overcome something. I don't even know how to properly phrase it. They'll be able to help them have, whatever limitations that they may have, not be part of their day, but they can make, use the word concessions, but I think that might be the inappropriate word, so that they can offer them that accessibility that they need. I understand that. What is something else that can be done within the workplace for that? We talked about the open lines of communication. Are there other items that could be brought into the workplace?
Yeah, for sure. One idea I had at one point, I spoke with this about someone. I can't remember if it was all my idea or shared, but either way, I thought it was pretty good that managers and like IT departments could install all these accessibility features on everyone's work laptops and computers and kind of make an umbrella fix for everyone. And anyone who doesn't want those accessibility features can then turn them off or ask for IT to turn them off. So in that way, you kind of eliminate the need of someone to come forward and say, hey, I need this feature added, and it can just be added for them by default. And then any able-bodied person who would not like them on there can just go ahead and remove it themselves, because it may be a little bit easier for them. Or if they're not able to, they can ask their IT department to do it for them. That's definitely was a interesting idea that I think it was me and the colleague had spoke about. And so I definitely think that could be very good as well, to just kind of get that for everyone. And then if someone doesn't want it, they can just remove it themselves. Because in my experience, accessibility features don't really hinder an able-bodied person's ability to do their work very much. And I could be wrong, but I've spoken with a few different people who do not suffer from a disability, and I showed them some accessibility features I was using, and they didn't even realize I had them turned on until I pointed them out to them. So people may not even notice that they have these features turned on. So I really wouldn't worry too much about hindering an able-bodied person's ability to do their work. So, yeah.
When you mentioned the accessibility features that could be enabled by default, I know I use an iPhone for a telephone. I know the iPhone has some accessibility options that you can turn on or turn off for different types of disabilities, I guess you could call them. What are some accessibility features that can be enabled? I know I'm a dinosaur and I'm fighting getting glasses. So I know with the iPhone, I add some of the vision type accessibility features so that I can see, primarily some of it just being the magnification, because if you look at my phone now, I think it's one letter per screen, like on the screen at a time, and I can move it around and that's how I read it. But what are some of the accessibility areas that can be added to someone's environment to help them within the workplace?
Yeah, I know in Excel they have some built-in accessibility features, and I think I might touch on this a little bit during my session at Summit. I was using Excel as a data source for a Power App I was creating, and one day I went in there to adjust the data model, and I was prompted if I wanted to enable accessibility features. And I got pretty excited because I thought that sounded great, and so I clicked yes. And it may be ignorant of me, but I just assumed it'd be like snap of a finger, and there it is. No, it pulled up a very complex screen of all these different features, and it was very intimidating. And so I eventually just clicked the X, and I was like, I'll use the vanilla version. So I feel like that could definitely be beneficial to let people know what's available, because they may not even know what could be helpful to them and what's available to them. So that's definitely part of it as well.
Taylor, really quick question for you. I mean, in the AI has been kind of all over the place, right? It's just progressing so quickly. Have you seen any tools that where AI is helping with accessibility?
Yeah, I actually want to do a session on this at some point, and I can definitely touch on a little bit here. I don't know if there's any AI tools that are specific for accessibility, but I have found personally using ChatGPT is almost like an ultimate accessibility tool because it's definitely not intended to be, but for me personally, I can type out an email and I can read through it and spell check it to the best of my ability, but I'm bound to miss things here and there. But with ChatGPT, I can type out my email, check through it, and then if I want to, I can just copy and paste in there and just say, hey, spell check this for me. And then it spits it right back out, and it's very helpful. So
Yeah,
I'm sure what's that?
yeah, no, you're right, because it's used. For example, I know someone has dyslexia, and they've used ChatGPT to help kind of translate what they're trying to say as well. So that is actually a good way to use it for. I also know that AI is used, speech recognition. Brad mentioned about using his Apple iPhone, and I think the upcoming release, Apple talks about this speech recognition where you can learn your speech pattern, and so you can type up something and have it talk back with your own voice and maybe clear or much more concise of reading it back to you. So there is a little bit of push around where AI can certainly help with accessibility as well.
Yeah,
Well,
it's definitely
I think it
exciting.
can. No, I think it can, Kris. You hit on a key point. If we're focusing on remote work, which also can cover over into physical in-person work, because there are, physical accessibility items, which we can talk about in a moment. But then is what Taylor started with in the conversation with the technical accessibility. There's different accessibility items that individuals need. There's vision, there's hearing, there's even maneuvering with hands. So with the vision, like I talked about with the screen magnifier, it's great that, gives someone the option to see things better. With these high resolution monitors, I always bump that thing up. I changed the resolution. It's great to have that fancy resolution, but I always have to bump the screen resolution up to 170,000%, which is a nice feature to have. But there's also devices for those that may have hearing issues as well on computers. So it's not limited to just vision. You also have hearing, and then even with some of your motor skills, you talked about something like AI, voice recognition software for those that may have difficulty typing. And also you can still use that same AI with the readers going the other way that can, Apple again has it on theirs built in that you can highlight text and have the device read it back to you so you could hear it if you have difficulty reading it, which are some things that, as Taylor's touching upon, some of these items that are labeled as accessibility items, everybody can benefit from. And it doesn't, I agree with Taylor, it doesn't, in most cases, I don't see how it could hinder somebody. It could help somebody, because even you can gain some efficiency by having the speech readers, like email being read back to you. It can easily help somebody with an accessibility issue, but also somebody who doesn't have it can take the benefit of that to become more efficient. So I think these are some great things that can be used in the workplace for that. And then also in the technical area, we talked about last time with websites, having the ability for, making it more accessible to those that are accessing the website, and even using some of these technological features that can work with the website, such as viewing with colors or speech. So you got me all into this now, Taylor, right? I've been over the time, it's been inspirational to speak with you and talk with you quite a bit about this. And then over time, I see more and more, and the whole awareness of it, like we spoke last time, just becoming aware of it can really change someone's view on it. So we thank you for all that you're doing for that. Sorry, I went on a little rant there. Kris got me started with this AI kick.
No worries at all, but I definitely appreciate that, because that's by far my biggest goal, is to raise awareness. Like I definitely have other goals, like acknowledging people on how to help others, but just making people aware of the current situation, because there are over 1 billion people in the world with some form of a disability, and I don't even think people know that. Like, just don't realize how prevalent it is, and it's such a wide spectrum of people that are being affected. And when you think that's like 1/6, 1/7 of the population, so there are good chances from a financial standpoint, you have customers who suffer from some sort of a disability. So you can look at it that way, where it can help your business to become more accessible. But I definitely would urge people to try just to do it to be a better human more so than to make money. But there's definitely, you can look at it from that way as well.
I think it is important for us to all, you say, become a better human. I think it is important in the world for everybody to take a step back and just realize we're all here together. And it doesn't take a lot sometimes to just be a good person. That old saying, it takes more muscles to frown than to smile, or something, or whatever it is. I think, it's much easier to be a good person than, to do bad things. And we talked about also with the feedback, the feedback from, given the opportunity for employees to provide feedback to make sure that the accessibility issues are being met. And also, like you said, the employer can do regular check-ins to make sure that the needs are being met. So everybody feels comfortable and included, which is good. Are there any other online or technical or remote worker accessibility options that you think would be of benefit?
Yeah, I use a narrator tool, which I find to be very helpful when using the computer. For example, like if I'm reading an article online that in that browser or that website doesn't have a read aloud option, it can definitely be helpful to use my narrator tool to hover the cursor over whatever I would like to read, and it'll just read that line for me, and then I can just move down and it can do that for me. And there's definitely some other third-party tools that you can install. Like I have one installed to give my cursor a highlight or a halo around it. It's kind of like a translucent halo around your cursor. Kind of just helps you follow your cursor. And also, I found that to be helpful whenever you're showing something on your computer. And I use it actually at DynamicsCon Live in Scottsdale at a Power App session. And I was going to turn my accessibility feature off, but then I thought to myself, you know what? People in the back may have a hard time seeing my cursor, and it may be helpful for them if I have these accessibility features turned on. And I decided to leave it on, and I got quite a few compliments on that and people thanking me. So, and the people who said that to me, I talked to them a little bit further, and they have no disability. They just enjoyed having that made a little bit easier for them, because everyone's going to experience some downgrade in their vision quality and their hearing and even mobility. At some point in our lives, we're all going to have some form of a disability if we're lucky enough to live long enough. And so it's just good to keep in mind for everyone. And
that is a great point, by the way.
So many things you can do.
That point that you just made is a profound statement. It's a great point that we all will eventually get there if we, get to the age, just because age itself, would deteriorate your hearing, your vision, your mobility, your flexibility. So having this available, it's not only for those that are disabled for one reason, but even as you get older and progress, I have to protect the dinosaurs here. It's my new kick, right? When we have all these, young people that we want to bring into the community, but we have to protect the dinosaurs too, right? Not just put them in the zoo or put them in the museum, which is a great point. I appreciate that you look at it from that perspective too. The age point. Kris, stop laughing.
I was laughing. I muted myself. Said,
"Yeah, I see the face. He everybody knows Kris and I. We joke a lot with each other quite a bit. So there's always some inside jokes on some of the stuff that he says to me too. But that's okay. So, are there any other technology or equipment that can be helpful for remote workers?
Let's see. I covered the cursor accessibility features I installed, and if anyone wants to get in touch with me and wants any advice on accessibility features that they could use, I'm sure we'll definitely touch at some point about my contact information, but feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email, and I can definitely give you some good resources to use. And I found the software I use for my cursor to be really helpful. It also comes with a lot of different things, but one other thing I use is called Focus. And basically what it does is it creates another like halo around your mouse. But what it does is it kind of dims out the rest of the screen and only shows clear focus what your cursor is at. So like the whole screen will be almost black, and then the only part that will be lit up is where your cursor is. It definitely can be a little distracting at times when you first get used to it, but I found it to be very helpful for when giving presentations and following along. And that's also reminded me, I don't want to go off on a rant, but it did remind me of another very important point from my session that I'll definitely touch on. And that's whenever you bring on new employees, like you're doing these trainings and showing them how to use these different products that your company uses. Say you're showing someone how to use Power BI, and they don't want to tell you right away because they just got hired, don't want to be treated differently, and so they won't tell you that they have visual impairment. And so you're sharing a screen and showing them how to use Power BI, and you could spend an hour on it, but they could have a very hard time following what you're doing because your tiny little cursor is bouncing around on the screen. And also, I don't know why the default cursor is white when most of the screens we work on are like 80% white space. So it can definitely be helpful when you're doing these trainings to make your presentation accessible, so whoever you're training can get as much out of that training as you want them to get. And that's definitely something I've experienced in my short time in this field. So I definitely like to share that point.
I'm not sure if it must be a Windows thing, but I think Apple Mac OS has black cursor as default.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Brad, I don't know if you could confirm that on your end, but I
My
do
cursor
know Windows has white.
is black with white outline.
Yeah.
On my Mac OS, Mac for life. I only use Windows because I have to.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I guess you're right. I work on Windows machine, and a default it is a white cursor. On the Mac,
I switch
OS,
everything to
it's
dark
black.
mode now. And again, with the Mac, I don't think I've noticed it because it is dark with a white outline. So I think even if it's on something that is white, you still get the contrast with the black. But if it's on black, like I have dark mode up, if it's on something dark, like a black background, I still see the cursor outline on the black background. So it's a good contrast because it has the white border with the black solid center of the cursor.
Yeah, so, no, I never noticed that. So that's a good call out because like in Windows, I do have to switch it, but that's interesting.
One thing we've been talking about remote accessibility, and in addition to remote accessibility, there's physical accessibility for those in-person workplaces, which I'd like to discuss. But one thing that I'd like to maybe switch to a little bit is you had mentioned yourself, you have a disability that you use tools to help you with. And if you would maybe take a few moments to maybe tell us your story of, with yourself, and also what got you into supporting this accessibility movement, I guess you could call it, or promoting accessibility in the workplace and just in life in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure how much time you want me to take up with this story.
Take as much time as you have.
I could probably,
or as much as you want to discuss
hours.
As well, too. By the way, it's it's a question we don't rehearse the question, so I just wanted to maybe have you share it because I think it's inspirational for others to hear as well, and maybe help anybody else who has an accessibility issue or a disability to be able to talk about it as well.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'll definitely give a pretty in detailed story in my session at Summit as well. But I'll give kind of an overall view of the story. I won't go too into it. But 5 years ago, on July 4th, 2018, I suffered a seizure while swimming by myself, which I urge everyone not to do. It's very stupid. So be safe and don't swim alone. Big mistake on my part. But I suffered a seizure while I was swimming and suffered an anoxic brain injury, which is just a brain injury due to a lack of oxygen going to my brain. So I was without new oxygen for 13 minutes and then without a heartbeat for 19. So it was definitely a very emotional time for my family. Sometimes I feel like the survivor's guilt. And I know it's a little different than the context that's normally used, but sometimes I feel a little guilty because my brain shielded me of all those memories, but my family remembers all of it so vividly. And so I feel guilty at times that they remember all of these hard times, and to me it's just kind of a blank space in my memory. Yeah, so after this had all happened, I was taken to a hospital in Rock Hill, North Carolina, or it's either North Carolina or South Carolina. I think it's right on the border. But I was taken there for a few days, and I was kind of touch and go for a little while. And the early part of the story is definitely better told by my parents and my family because, again, they're more vivid memories for them. I wasn't aware of what was going on for about the first 2 or 3 months after my injury. Yeah, so I stayed at this hospital for about 3 days, and then I was moved to MUSC, which is a very good hospital in South Carolina in Charleston. So, and I was there for, I think, around 2 weeks or so, and did a little bit of early physical therapy in the bed. I was still very low responsive. And with brain injury victims and maybe other injuries as well, they have what's called the Rancho scale. And it's basically like a gradation of what level of a coma you're in. And I believe it goes 1 to 5. And I think 1 is the best. I don't know. I don't know if it's backwards the way you would think. Either way, when I was in Charleston at the second hospital, I was still really low on the scale. I was still in a pretty deep coma at the time. And then after a few weeks at MUSC, my family decided to take me to the Shepherd Center in Atlanta. And I spent quite a bit of time here. I think maybe around 3 months. And here is where I did a lot of my rehab and made a lot of my strides forward in my rehab, where I spoke for the first time, walked for the first time, pretty much did everything for the first time again, which at the time seemed kind of normal. Like, it was kind of surreal for me at the time. It didn't really settle in for me personally till almost like a year or two post-injury, because for such a long time my life was dominated by rehab, so I didn't really have time to think about anything, which I think kind of was the point, that they wanted me to focus on rehab and not focus on what was going wrong. And so yeah, I spent quite a bit of time there, made a lot of progress, and then eventually I came home, did more outpatient therapy, because even when I was discharged, still to this day have a visual impairment, but at that point I was still legally blind. Still was in a wheelchair, and my speech was still pretty rough. But I was at a point where I could move back home and do more outpatient therapy. And so I continued with that for about 2 years. And then at some point I just kind of hit the point where I got tired of only doing rehab and I spoke with my dad, who's in this field right now, and I asked him what he thinks I should do, because I kind of bounced around from a few different things. And he had mentioned to me about a newer product in the Microsoft space called Power Apps. And at first I was really unimpressed and unenthusiastic. It sounded really boring.
That's a great quote, Kris. At first, I was really unimpressed. It sounded kind of boring. I love that.
Yeah, hopefully I'm not quoted on that in like 5 years. But yeah.
No, those are the best things to go back and look at, is some of the things you said early on in your career.
Yeah, I thought it sounded very boring, but my dad mentioned it to me a few times later on. And I was like, you know what? Let's give it a shot. Who knows? And I had my apprehensions because of my disability, so I didn't know how well I would adjust to learning something new and 2D and on the computer with my visual impairment. So I was definitely reluctant because of that, but I decided to give it a shot because I really had no idea what else to do, so I figured why not? And I fell in love with it. I found a great passion with Power Apps. I really enjoy the creativity that you have when creating a Power App, and just
so it's
really
not
enjoy
so boring.
it. Yeah, it's really not. I mean, I'm sure there's some people, like when I tell people what I do, they think it's boring, and I don't blame them.
Someone will find what you do is boring.
After we're done recording this, I'll tell you something that I said at one point that you look back and I chuckle upon, that I said many years ago within this space, that you laugh. Like I said, sometimes you go back and you think of some of the things you said, and it's funny.
What an incredible story, Taylor. I appreciate you sharing it with us.
It's truly inspirational. It must have been a trying time for both you as well as your family, which is a big part of it. And it's great that you had the support, which is also important. You had the support of your family as you went through this. And I wouldn't know, speaking with you again, if I were to just meet you, that you had any of this happen to you, which also goes to the point that a lot of people have hidden disabilities or hidden traumas or hidden issues, I guess you could call them, that aren't so apparent. So everybody, I think, goes back with being a good human. That's my new word, Kris, human. That everybody just be a good person, have a little awareness, and maybe understand that somebody may have gone through something, is going through something, may have, it may be having a bad, anxious day, or may having some challenges. So I'm glad to see.
Love the fact your dad introduced you to Power Apps.
Yeah,
that's the way to do it, I think. Now,
not a huge fan of giving him credit, but he definitely deserves it.
We can edit that out if you'd like. And, so if you want, if you tell him to listen or ask him to listen, or maybe he does listen, we'll just edit out the part where you gave him credit for bringing you into this industry.
It's all right. He can have the credit. He'll do me a solid and give me credit for things that were my ideas, and he doesn't want to take credit for it. So it goes both ways. So we're a very supportive family, and like Kris was saying, and you were saying, it was definitely very nice to have such a supportive family help me through that. It definitely made the process a lot easier. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever be done rehabbing and improving myself. It's kind of at the point I don't think my vision's going to improve that much anymore. I haven't noticed any improvement over the past couple of years, but I'm always working on my speech. And actually, before this podcast, I was doing quite a number of vocal warm-ups to get ready, because early in the morning and even just days where I don't do much talking, it can be a little hard to understand me at times. So I try to make sure I'm articulating as much as I can and warm up before calls. And there's just things that tend to be lost on a lot of people because they tend to take these things for granted, which, I mean, I don't blame them. I did the same thing before all this became normalized for me. Yeah, I just find it funny how I spent probably 30 minutes before this call doing vocal warm-ups, and most people could have just rolled out of bed and it sounded fine.
That's another great point. It's everybody has a routine. You may not realize what somebody has to go through. I'm interested in learning some of those vocal warm-ups. And it is true. Some people take so many things for granted until it's not there. With mobility, with flexibility, with speaking, with seeing, with hearing, anybody could have it lost, like you had, in a moment, without even, just doing a normal course of action, have some sort of accident or trauma happen, and they could, lose one of their senses or have other impairments. Not just people who are born with them. So it's important. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. It's inspirational. I'm glad to see that you're advocating for those with accessibility challenges, accessibility disabilities, and also looking for inclusivity within the workplace, within the community, and everywhere else.
Yeah, that's definitely how I got involved in the world of accessibility, but I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit here. Even before I got into this community doing Power Apps and now accessibility, common theme with all the job ideas I bounce around with, they all had one common denominator, was that they all had something to do with helping people. And one of the apprehensions I had when I got in this field was, am I just going to give that up and just do something kind of a little bit more self-serving just because I want a job? And then I found out about the world of accessibility and started learning more about it and getting more involved and doing public speaking. And I feel like I've kind of gone back to my roots in helping people. And so I'm definitely very proud of that.
No, that's great. And you're doing a great job. And sometimes, as I think we spoke about before, if you just change one life or make one person aware, you can start a domino effect, because that person can also become someone who's an advocate or, is now aware of it and can do a lot for the accessibility, inclusivity, and diversity movement. So we spoke about remote, technological type of accessibility challenges, remedies that a company could do. What are some physical accessibility improvements that a company can make for accessibility?
Absolutely. And this is an area I'm definitely a little bit less experienced with, because for me it's less of a physical disability as it is it is physical, but it's a different kind. It's not mobility related, but there's definitely some simple things and things that may seem simple and might get overlooked, but having like ramps to get in and out of your building. And I'm sure if a company has any employees who have that, they probably already took those steps. But again, I feel like there are definitely some things that are taken for granted, and some people will just overlook these things.
Ramps are important, and it's not just for those with wheelchairs. There are other it's not the way you say. Is a lot of people associate the ramps with wheelchairs, but there are individuals that need walkers. There are individuals that may have walking challenges, that they can walk, but they can't walk upstairs easily. So a ramp is a way that makes it easier for them to still continue to walk, but not have any strain, pain, or, affecting their disability that they may have.
And also, you have, when people think disabilities, they think physical or permanent disabilities, but you could also have a temporary disability. Say you went snowboarding over the weekend, you broke your foot, you can't really go upstairs very well. It might be nice to have a little low ramp to ease your way into the building. Just some of these things can definitely make your workplace more accessible. And another thing I am a big advocate for is having clearly marked restrooms, locations, as well as which one's the correct one to go into. I've had a few times in my experience I've walked in the wrong one. And it's definitely embarrassing because, again, I have a hidden disability, so sometimes you're like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. And I immediately explain everything. And so far, it hasn't been a problem. Luckily, it hasn't happened in quite a few years. So,
No, that's good.
It's definitely something to keep in mind that a lot of people overlook. Because I mean, I didn't learn Braille. I can read, but every now and then, and it seems almost always the men's room is on the right and the women's on the left. But every now and then they're switched. And I'll just go off muscle memory, but all right, the right's the men's, and I just walk in like, I don't see, this doesn't look like a men's room, and I'll just turn around and walk out. I'm like, no, that wasn't it.
I noticed that too. There are some cases where they are flipped, but for the most part, I wonder if that's just done, or is it just some people just out of habit, maybe early on, they continue to do it that way, or is there some regulation written somewhere that states that, you know, there's different areas have different requirements. So I wonder if that's it. And you did mention the restrooms. Restrooms are a big place. You see sometimes that you can have wider stalls, you can have lower sinks, you can have grab bars, you know, all the things that can, when somebody goes into the restroom, they can, you know, have some accessibility to say for the physical. And as you had mentioned also for anybody that has visual issues, or impairments, I should say, to see that, which is good. Are there any other physical accessibility items that you think would be beneficial within the workplace?
I do have a comment really quick, though. I had a conversation with somebody, I think it was several weeks ago, about providing language as part of accessibility. And it kind of blurs that line because we talked about inclusion and accessibility, of kind of bridging that gap by providing additional languages for people that may, you know, where English may not be their first language, and trying to make it available so that they can also succeed as much as their peers. Have you had?
Are you suggesting training classes as language, or what do you mean by providing language?
Like, for example, where you have a tool and sometimes English translates differently from other languages, so it can be interpreted differently. And so you can flip and change the language of the tool. So instead of, like, maybe, for example, it's not English, you can have it in Spanish or other language. I think that's something to, you know, again, is that considered accessibility?
I don't think I would consider that accessibility, because the accessibility is definitely targeted towards equalizing opportunities for disabled persons. I would count that more as inclusivity, just kind of making a more inclusive environment for people of a different nationality or different foreign speakers. But all these diversity, inclusion, equity, all these things can definitely overlap in several ways. So by providing accessibility options at your company, you're also creating a more inclusive company by making it more accessible, and also with diversity as well.
That sort of makes sense.
Yes.
That's why you often hear, I actually was invited to be a part of a panel at Summit, and they're going to be, the topic will be diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, because they're all intertwined in some ways, but they all have their own significance in their own way.
Oh, very good. So you're going to be at Summit as a panelist? That's awesome.
So we have to see the session and a panelist. It's great.
Yeah,
I'm glad to see that you're doing
two panels now. That's my second one. Actually, it was totally unplanned. My summit this year is going to have kind of a diversity theme to it. Totally unplanned, but I'll have my solo session on accessibility, and then I'll have that panel on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And then I'll have a panel with a coworker of mine and two all-stars in the community, Bob McAdam and Belinda Allen. And we'll be discussing, I believe it's called Power Recruiting, from A to Gen Z, talking about bringing more of the newer generation into the tech field and talking about the employment gap. And I've definitely experienced some of this challenge in my early career in this field. So I'll definitely have some interesting input in that panel as well.
I'm interested in seeing that panel or hearing what they have to say, and also the questions that get asked about that. It's nice to see that you get to have the two panels and to have your session. I will attend all of those, schedule permitting. I have to see what my schedule is like. I know some of the things that happen at Summit end up unplanned. I'm in the same boat. I have a few things going on that I wasn't planning on, but somehow I'm in there, which is great. I love participating for things like this with the community. Some other things, that I think of when we talk about accessibility, physical accessibility in the workplace, remote doors to allow, to open the doors, make it easier, maybe have little wider doors, parking. I think most states now have regulations as far as having parking for handicap, or they call them handicap parking, or those with disabilities, as well as, thankfully some ramping and grading issues with stairs, just to have some consistency to allow individuals in. One thing that I thought of as we're talking about this, we talk about the remote. It's not really remote or it's physical, but it comes into flexibility, I think, within the workplace. I know we all have different jobs, we'll call them, require different things to be done. Some jobs require you to do certain things at certain times, but where possible, maybe even flexibility to give someone a break that can't sit too long, for example, or having a desk that can stand or sit, or have a different adjustment to help them with the physical. But just some of that flexibility in how they work, so that they can get the task and job done, but still be able to, for putting it simply, just to take a break if they need to take a break, to rest their eyes, rest their hands, rest their mind. Kris has been trying to get a nap in the schedule and everybody to have a cot, but I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely a great point. And that actually reminds me of also keeping in mind other disabilities and accessibility needs for people with more cognitive or mental disabilities, such as depression, anxiety, ADD, dyslexia. Like all these things, like they may not be able to work for a certain amount of time in the day. Like they may need to take more frequent breaks. So I feel like, again, it's creating more and more awareness of all the different disabilities that you need to keep in mind, and kind of be aware of that, how prevalent they also are, and just be open-minded on creating more inclusive environment for your employees.
No, it's great. It's great information, Taylor. Thank you. Well, Taylor, as always, thank you for taking the time to speak with us, to continue on with the discussion that we had on accessibility. If anyone hasn't heard the first recording, go back and you can search and you can find it. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And also, we talked about you appearing and having two panels in a solo session at Summit in October in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's right on the line, Charlotte, North Carolina Community Summit. How else would someone be able to contact you to talk more about accessibility, diversity, equity, inclusion, or any other great things that you're doing with the not so fun, that's boring Power Platform?
Yeah, you can definitely feel free to reach out to me on my LinkedIn. It's just Taylor Dorward, and I know it may not be the easiest to spell, so I'm sure you can find me if you try hard enough. But you can also reach me at taylor@lifehacks365.com. And I'll be at Summit, as we said, so I would love to meet everyone. If you want to come up, talk to me after one of my sessions or at a networking event. Definitely one of the big reasons I love going to these things, meeting more and more people and expanding my network. And I also will have a webinar next Wednesday on the same topic. It'll be kind of another preview for my session, my accessibility session at Summit, doing some viral marketing, I guess you could say.
You had mentioned you have a webinar. Will that webinar be recorded and accessible to somebody who may listen to this after the webinar is available? And how would they get the webinar?
Yes, it definitely will be recorded, and I believe will be on the company's education portal, their platform. It's UST Education. I believe it stands for United States Transactions. They have two platforms or two verticals, one more business and then one more educational. So I'll be participating in their educational platform and doing a webinar on accessibility next Wednesday.
Oh, great! I'm looking forward to seeing that as well.
Taylor, do you know what day is your session at Summit? We'll put the agenda down below, but
the agenda can change. So I think anyone should look and suggest anyone looks at the agenda, because I know from past experience, some adjustments are made due to scheduling changes, conflicts or travel arrangements, illness. So it's always best to look at the agenda.
The best way to let people know is just let them know the names of the session, so they'll recognize you. Be like, oh, that's so-and-so session. So I'll have the one that power recruiting with Bob and Belinda and Madison, and then I'll have the one on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And then I'll have my solo session. I think it changed the name of the session this year. I think it's called Opening Doors, Creating a More Inclusive Work Environment, something like that.
Okay, great.
I had fun with ChatGPT working out some new names.
Kris GPT does so many great things.
Very, very, very good.
But on the agenda, you can also search by presenter as well. So they can search your name and see the sessions in the event that the names are an adjustment. Thank you again, Taylor. As always, it was a great conversation. I look forward to seeing you at Summit. I also look forward to watching the webinar that you present as well on the UST education.
Oh, thank you. And it was really great seeing you guys again. Look forward to seeing you all in Charlotte.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Ciao, ciao. Thank you.
All right.
Take care, guys.
Thank you, Kris, for your time for another episode of In the Dynamics Corner Chair. And thank you to our guests for participating.
Thank you, Brad, for your time. It is a wonderful episode of Dynamics Corner Chair. I would also like to thank our guests for joining us. Thank you for all of our listeners tuning in as well. You can find Brad at developerlife.com. That is DVLPRLIFE.com. And you can interact with them via Twitter, DVLPRLIFE. You can also find me at matalino.io, MATALINO.io. And my Twitter handle is Matalino16. And you can see those links down below in the show notes. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, and take care.